Okay, so we've heard about a lot of challenges in this sort of brave new world of TV attribution. So I think, without belaboring, just to make sure everyone knows, sort of the obvious is the reason this has come about is through the availability of more granular TV data. So it's through the data from smart TVs and the data from set-top boxes, the ad exposure data and set-top boxes. So, since it's still the early days, we're going to talk a little bit more just about the challenges and kind of how we can help to lead this, in the right direction. So, one of the challenges, that we've heard mentioned several times here was kind of data quality and having representative samples of the TV data, even to match to whatever else we want for our outcome data. So maybe you guys could just talk a little bit more about, do you feel that has, a problem now, or are you feeling like you're getting kind of good enough data, just to make sure everyone knows the footprint, so the smart TV data, is different data from different manufacturers, so there isn't like a nationally representative footprint of smart TV data, and the set-top box data all comes from different operators. So there isn't a nationally representative data set of set-top box data. So everyone's kind of pulling pieces together and making it look as good as they can. So if we could just talk a little bit about that. Is that a problem, or are the data sets that we have really good enough to make this work? Because we're seeing a lot of really good, interesting findings in data here. So just take it away, you guys.
I can start. Yeah. It's a major problem, and it's overlooked by most people. That most data sets that are on the TV data sets today on the market are extremely raw, extremely inaccurate. I know that we've spent 6 years and some $60 million, a lot of data science, a lot of engineering, in correcting and building not only accuracy, but consistency and scale and reliability. And that is extremely hard to do, and I think most companies today think they could just take whatever raw data set, stick it in, and start measuring based on it. But I think that's probably the most overlooked piece in this entire ecosystem.
But do you think you'll have to bring in other data other than smart TV data, or do you think
Yes, you got to have multiple data sets, and it's not just for viewing. You got to have an ad catalog. You got to have airings data. You got to have demographics data. You got to have census data. You got to have knowledge of how many households and TVs are in each zip code and DMA. There's a million things that you need to do all this, and you need to understand the shortcomings in the raw data, and you need to know how to deal with it and how to correct it. And it takes a lot of time and capital. It's not like just, hey. And another thing that I see is a lot of people doing this not at scale. In other words, they'll take some creatives, feed them through an ACR system. That is a sure way to get very inaccurate data. That is the easiest way to get inaccurate data.
How about the rest of you?
Yeah, so we all agree, right? If you just start to bucketize the data, you got to get your glass data, right? Because that's a specific way of consumption. You got to get set-top box data, and you've got other buckets of data. And I agree 100% with Sean. Remains a massive problem, and that's why we see so much variance between solutions when one is dependent on just one data sets of 8 million, et cetera. But what I will say is that you don't have to go get all the data that's out there either, because we understand the capital limitations and there are some people who will sell you their data at an outrageous price, right? So I think what you need is a mixture of as much decent data as you can get, and then data science. And modeling, and then you will get into it, not perfect, but good enough. But I think we're very much still in the early years of that.
Yeah, I think the idea of it not being perfect, if we waited for perfection, we wouldn't be doing anything. We wouldn't even be having ratings if we waited for perfection. So, but I think
we wouldn't get out of bed.
But I think.
But let's make sure the bar is not too low.
Right.
And that's really what the trade-off is. Yeah. Is that and we also, just because a data set has millions, I've heard people say, well, it's got to be representative because it's got tens of millions of data
I like
records.
to call that the internet data era. It's a big data set.
And Dave is right. It's not just the scale. Actually, scale is important, but it's not actually as important as what you do with the scale that you have and the consistency of it. And by the way, Nielsen, they are the currency based off of really, really tiny scale. They do have a lot of data science and a lot of processes, and they do things at scale. So I know we all love to bash them, but it's not just the scale, right? The scale is important, but
I think the biggest challenge is you have to figure out, is the data going to give you a solution that's at least directionally saying, if something's working well, is it really working well? I think where you really run into trouble, you could analyze something, and this has been a problem with attribution for TV. If you don't have the right attribution model, and there's not an understanding of how TV works over time, not just that last occasion, that you can go completely wrong. A campaign could be working very well, but you might not get any sort of lift at all off of certain types of models.
So Jane, you were asking about problems, right? Yeah. Those, to me, the data problems are solvable. There are plenty of legit partners. And I don't want to get, this is a TV thing, we keep getting involved in whether the data is perfect or representative or whatever, right? I mean, that's fine, we have to deal with it, but there are bigger problems, right? I think the lack of understanding of how TV works is sort of the biggest problem out there. And not taking into account all the times and all the ways in which TV is consumed is a big issue. And I think that digital's been quick to jump on some version of last exposure, whether it's through social, whether it's through search, or whether it's through something else. And TV is different, right? TV has all kinds of impact, upper and lower funnel, and through the various consumption occasions. And I think that that's where we need to focus our energies. We need to tell the story of how it's actually consumed and the gigantic impact it's having, and worry less about the perfection of a specific methodology.
And let me add to that, because that's a spot-on point. And I think you made that point about data scientists translating things. We work with hundreds of brands out there, and they all have data science teams, and almost always their media teams are like, we can't, with everything we're getting from these data scientists, we can't, like, actually making these analytics actionable with the knowledge of how TV is bought is so important, and it's actually why every digital MTA company has failed coming into TV.
Yeah.
I mean, there's many reasons, but that's one major one. And so the understanding of how TV is bought is so critical to creating.
And how the impact over time, and the different kinds of television. You guys are going to have to really jump in here, because they're going to jump right ahead, so come on.
I think Sean and Rada are exactly right. We call it translational sciences. Is how do you actually get the insights into market, because it's only when it influences your buy decisions that you're actually going to reap the benefits of all the data science investment you've made. I'd say, like, for us, getting good quality data was the first piece. Getting more data would not be my next concern. So getting quality data, making sure that we have some fundamental understanding of how television is working as a medium. But then now rubber hit the road. We have to make sure that we're actually getting the most value from the data investments that we've already made. And I'm not sure if anyone could honestly say, yes, we are making the most use of our data. So for me, at least with my team, trying to figure out how do we actually translate these insights is a big issue.
For me, we'll get back to you also about how you're fitting this in with other media as well, but go ahead.
For me, another challenge is the fact that there isn't one set of people who are uniquely capable of creating data all by themselves. This actually kind of requires a bunch of cooks, all working in synchronicity and in collaboration. And to me, kind of that element has also kind of proven to be a challenge, or can prove to be a challenge.
Great. Also, we heard some good presentations here, the issue about control groups and baseline and incrementality. If any of you want to add to that, I think that's really critical. How many studies have we seen where everybody talks about the lift and the lift and the lift, and you don't know really what lift means? So maybe if you guys could just address that a little bit, because it's a real challenge to create control groups for television.
I'll jump in on that one. So to some extent, television has actually challenged some of at least my thinking of online attribution.
Right.
Going through the process of trying to attribute an offline channel really requires the best of the best. And so when I'm trying to figure out how to allocate data scientists, I want my best data scientist on television because it's so challenging. And as you're going through the process of understanding how to attribute television, it basically reveals how little or how little I at least understood about online attribution. So for example, it is uncommon for companies to have used last touch or some form of, even with MTA models, a lot of times it's still very click-oriented. Television does not have its own click point on your site. So it's all view-based, where someone was exposed to some stimulus, and now we have to understand how they've come through. And I wonder how often other marketing channels that organizations attribute with click-through, how often the actual view, the impression itself of someone having seen the ad is an influencing factor that we just don't take into account. And so I think television is actually challenging some of how we're attributing online marketing, or at least the way I'm thinking about it.
But anyone else want to add more about control
I couldn't agree more,
group?
right? I spent 10 years in TV, and then I spent 10 years doing digital social. And it's kind of funny, we hold ourselves to such high standards in TV, maybe rightly so, because the stakes are so high, right? But at the same time, I think we are, in terms of the truth-telling and the rigor, perhaps higher than a lot of digital measurement out there and digital attribution, because we are thinking about these really thorny questions. You wouldn't have found in the early years of digital attribution a panel up here where people are questioning and having really thoughtful debate about whether they're doing it right or not. People were just grabbing territory, right? So I think we're actually much farther along than we think we are.
Yeah, and just to use another real-life example, so one of our large auto clients, their digital attribution models were last click, and they had this much for digital, this much for display, this much for email, this one for SEM, SEO, and then they said everything else is TV. That was their attribution model. But what had actually occurred there is that 50% that was TV, they're actually pretty close on the 50% that was TV, but it wasn't the right 50%, right? So it turned out that about 25% of what they attributed to digital also had major influence by TV, and then 25% of the 50 they attributed to TV was TV, and then the other 25% was not necessarily driven by TV. So it is shifting a lot of people's sort of holistics models and approaches for sure.
Yeah, and it is, again, another huge challenge. I mean, there's no such thing basically as a pure control group, because even outside the realm of getting exposed to media, you've got all sorts of promotion, you've got lots of things, you've got many influences. Human behavior is pretty hard to model out. So I think, for example, Sean's technique at iSpot is really good. It's not perfect, but we can't
Good
wait for perfection.
For now.
And I think that, especially with
Good enough for today.
with large television advertisers, I mean, there is no zero base. I mean, they've been exposed, some perpetually for decades, and so there's been an equity that's building up over time that it's very hard to get a control group that's perfect. But again,
and the more variables you put in there, or the more the control groups gets lower and lower, and all of a sudden the confidence is. So you do need to balance. You can't control for everything.
Right.
You just have to figure out what are the most important things to control of, while still getting sufficient scale for the measurement.
Well, let's just end a little bit from the marketer point of view, which is now that you have TV attribution, and you guys can also pitch in from some of your experience with marketers, but now that you have TV attribution, you've already had your multi-touch digital attribution, you have whatever else you're doing to look at other media. I mean, how are you fitting this whole new data silo, I don't want to call it that, into, how are you integrating it with all of your other attribution measurement to try to really get to full cross-channel?
That's a good question. That's actually one of the reasons why I'm here, is to understand how other folks are thinking about that very question. If you're expecting a really intelligent answer to this question, you've come to the wrong person. I think we're actually still in the early stages. I mean, it's been a struggle it's been challenging just to get basic measurements in place. Like, I feel like you have to be able to and be certain of attribution on one channel before you could get to the multi-level attribution, and then like lifetime values, another big layer on top of that we haven't even spoken about here in this group yet. So I think it's a process. I think we're moving towards it, but I don't have the magic bullet.
An honest man.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
And by the way, that's true for most major brands today in the marketplace. That there is nobody that's really, really nailed this yet. And Tim's point is right. What you want to do is you want to have best of breed in each channel that's connectable. Do that first, because if you go right to unified measurement, you might end up with unified crap, which is not the goal, I think, here.
We quote you on that, John.
So what we're seeing from marketing partners, right, is that they almost fall into two buckets. There are the companies who've been around a long time, have very rigorous models that are built out, and there we're seeing that MMM is still used for allocation of dollars overall, but MTA is used for optimization, including optimization in flight. So that's a whole category of established brands we're working with, right? And then a lot of what you call, and then there's internet first clients, right? And people who've grown up in digital and were born on digital. And for them, it's not that sort of top-down approach. It's much more a bottoms-up approach, and that's where attribution is being used for allocation. And that's where I still think we're very much in the early stages, because they're learning with us in real time. Oh, wait, TV doesn't work like digital does. Yes, we were born in digital, but now we're trying to be in the big league, so we have to pivot our model somewhat. And I think that's where a lot of learning is going on.
I'll actually add something to that. So I completely agree that television actually is quite unique, and for its, I think one of the big unique values of it is its long tail. Is the fact that it's not just minutes after, but you could see a really long impact. And just kind of how do you justify this, or how can folks understand it who are not on the measurement side? You can remember television ads from your childhood. You can't remember an SCM ad that you saw this morning. I certainly can't, even though I'm working with the team that makes them, and I can't remember what we did this morning. So. Television is very unique in that long tail effect. And I can tell you that one of the questions, and I think the next step to getting there, is understanding the interaction effect between folks that are exposed to different media wherever we can see that. Is television, as some would think, a force multiplier behind other channels, or vice versa? And that, I think, is kind of the next step to really incrementally moving this forward.
There was actually work done a long time ago, the advertising work study that showed that half of the impact of a television campaign was a year after the campaign had ended.
Well, anyway, we're out of time, so I'm getting the cross signal from Jim here. But thank you, guys, and this is a really interesting new area, and we'll have to come back next year and hear more, because there's still a lot to learn.